Hello and welcome to the second episode of Anchor Watch with Bobby Jones. I'm coming to you from the road. I'm in the great state of North Carolina. I'll be speaking at a veterans event, having a panel discussion on some of the things that we're seeing both in the VA and in the Department of Defense. There'll be a link to that in my Substack afterwards. So I just want to start off with our opening salvo, my welcome to everybody, and just give you a rundown of what I want to talk about, whether it's on your lunch hour, breakfast, just quick, tidy rundown. First of all, we're going to talk about the recent trip that Donald Trump took to the Middle East, his first foreign trip after, coming back into office. There are a lot of things that I think are going to have some long-term effects on not just the United States, but the global world order. And then we're going to talk about domestically what has happened in the last week in that same time period, some things that may have been neglected, may not have been talked about, that really need to be brought to the forefront. And then finally, I'll open it up to your questions. So please start putting your questions and comments in the chat. I definitely want to try to get to it. And you can email or text me or shoot me a note on Substack, basically, throughout the week if you have any questions, concerns that come up during the week. All this stuff happens so quickly under the current administration. It's a lot to get your hands around, but we're going to do our best here to make sure we focus on what's important. So that being said, today's anchor point, the main thrust of today's episode. President Trump took his first foreign trip abroad. He went to the Middle East. Now, with all the conflict and all of the things that are happening in the Middle East, you would think that he would have a pretty set, tight agenda that basically would help bring some stability to the region. I don't think that's what happened, to be honest with you. He brought some stability. He brought stability to his personal bank account. What do I mean by that? The countries that he took the time to visit were Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And in each one of those countries, we saw economic deals that were brokered on behalf of the United States. $600 billion in investment from Saudi Arabia, that commitment, $1.2 trillion of economic interest between Qatar and the United States. The UAE, $200 billion in commercial deals that were supposedly brokered. Sounds great as far as money on paper, as far as pledges, not guarantees, but pledges for these deals. Now, he also had the chance to talk to Syria's new head of state. And I found that kind of interesting until I started doing a little bit more deep diving. Each one of those countries, to include Syria, which he didn't even visit, they all have one thing in common. The Trump family business have struck economic deals in each one of those locations to the point where we're looking at possibly Trump Towers, Damascus in Syria. Every last one of these countries have given personal, and I mean personal, economic guarantees to Donald Trump, not President Trump, the Trump family, not the American government, Trump's family. So let that marinate for a second. And why does this matter? Well, we've already seen an easing or discussed easings of sanctions against Syria. We're seeing us go into business deals with countries that have had checkered past when dealing with the United States. Let's not forget, Qatar has direct ties to supporting Hamas and other terrorist organizations across the Middle East. We've seen obviously Saudi Arabia's history going back to 9/11 and a little bit before that. These things are being brushed aside in order to bring money, transactional, again, money, 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 money. That's all that seems to matter. But what bothers me is how it's personally enriching the president. I'm old enough to remember when Hunter Biden and the Biden family were told that they were A, B, C, and D by President Trump's party because of the business deals he did. The Trump boys are doing way more business based on the fact that Donald Trump is in the White House. And now that leads us to the golden goose, the Qatari plane that is supposedly being, quote, offered for free, unquote, according to Donald Trump. Well, we've now found out that is not even remotely close to the case. We went to Qatar trying to get that plane. According to CNN's reporting, confirmed by not one, not two, not three, but four different sources. When President Trump came back in the White House in January, he wanted to know what the status was of the Air Force Ones that he ordered on his way out of his first administration. Now, I talked about this in our last episode because it made no sense to me. If you know you have two planes that you ordered with specific military specifications, why would you be ordering, or why would you be trying to take another jet on? Well, we now know Boeing said those planes would not be ready for another 2 years, but Boeing also provided the president and the Pentagon a list of countries that they have created a 747 for that could possibly be retrofitted to meet Air Force One's requirements. And the second Trump saw the opulence of this Qatari plane, he wanted it. They showed it to him. He wanted it, to the point where throughout the whole Doge thing that we've been talking about, cutting government spending, blah, 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 the $400 million price tag seemed to not be an obstacle. $400 million for a temporary plane that you would have to go back and retrofit, and probably cost just as much to do that, to make sure it's completely clean. And then he gets to keep it as the new Boeing Air Force Ones come online. It's the ultimate grift. This is not about the functionality of Air Force One that we currently have. It's about Donald Trump and his aviation envy. If you know anything about him, some of us are old enough to remember, he's always been fascinated with how great his plane looks, going all the way back to the 80s, having a private plane, then having a private luxury liner plane. All of these things are consistent to his personality, right? So we should not be shocked that now all of the real truth is coming out. And basically, he wanted the new shiny toy, which is not even new and shiny. The plane, I want to say, is almost 5 years old, over 5 years old, and they couldn't sell it. But he needs to have it, only because of his ego. Never mind the fact the United States does not accept military equipment from other countries. We are the ones that give military equipment to other countries. That's what we just gave Saudi Arabia and Qatar as far as military deals. But he needs that level of grandeur so bad that he's going to make the Department of Defense take a plane they did not build, they did not order, they have no specifications on how they're going to have to retrofit it until they see it. They have a plan, but they got to see it and then make that happen. And it's going to cost the taxpayers $400 million. As you know, Doge is over here talking about we're cutting money left and right and saving the government. Make it make sense. It makes zero sense. But most importantly, those visits that he took to include that plane does one thing. It provides stability for his pocketbook, not the United States of America. So moving on to this next segment that I call, and I call it Below the Waterline. So if you are in the Navy or on any type of vessel, any type of ship, you know, every now and then you want to put that ship in dry dock and clean everything below the waterline, because there's growth and there's barnacles that grow on the ship that slow it down, that affect its performance. And God forbid if something happens below the waterline where you have a hole, the ship could sink. But you would never see it if you're just looking at the ship from the shore. So below the waterline is what I want to use to talk about things that are happening here in the United States that make us less safe, that may or may not get the publicity it should. And so I'm going to start that off with the current emergency that's happening in the Midwest. So unfortunately, we had some bad weather, severe weather come through the Midwest to affect Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri, that area of the country. Many people have unfortunately passed away, and you know, I send my prayers there. I have a family member that is currently in that area, still without power. The struggle is real. The question I have is, where's FEMA? Where is the Federal Emergency Management Agency? Oh, wait, that's right. It got gutted when Trump came into office. You had every governor that has been affected request federal help from the federal government, and they have been met with crickets. This includes Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was his former press secretary down in Arkansas. No one from FEMA has come to help. But most importantly, President Trump has not even made a statement about what's going on. And again, when we're talking about national emergencies, politics goes out the window, right? But if you were looking at a political map, overwhelmingly the people who are now affected by these tragedies voted for Donald Trump overwhelmingly. And this is just the second instance of something like this. Right after Trump came into office, the first couple of weeks, West Virginia and the flooding and everything it went through, they're still reeling from that because of the slow response by FEMA. Now, why was the response slow? Well, the head of FEMA was replaced by a loyalist, and over 1,800 FEMA positions have been gutted from the organization. 1,800. These are the people that are on the ground that are helping provide, the fresh water, the immediate needs, food, diapers, stuff for babies that are always on the ground, right? Helping to coordinate that with National Guard and all these other organizations. Not there. Not there. Give you a little bit of history. FEMA was founded in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, a president that was compassionate and cared about people, to make it so the federal government can easily flex its muscles for emergencies such as these, right? Well, with the gutting of it, you don't have the capability. And understand, FEMA now falls under the Department of Homeland Security, i.e., keeping Americans safe, right? All of these different organizations like ICE and this, that, and other that falls under Homeland Security, use what we call hard power to do it. But FEMA is the soft response. They're the ones that go out into the communities and make sure you feel safe doing your day-to-day stuff after a national disaster. And right now, these people have nowhere to turn except for their local governments, and their local governments may be offline, overwhelmed, or both. This is why you need FEMA to be at full strength for days such as these. But like I said, the Trump administration has yet to give an official stance on what's going on and what they're doing about it, to include declaring states of emergencies in these various counties and states. Other things that are happening below the waterline. The temporary protected status of Venezuelans has basically been suspended. This is something that the Trump organization advocated for, went to court for, and right now the Supreme Court is upholding that executive action. Now, here's the thing. If you remember anything about the election, we had a lot of Venezuelans that voted for Trump, especially down in the Florida area of the country. And now you're seeing, not just in regular media, but social media, you're seeing a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, showing regret for that decision because they felt like they were lied to. And they were, but you had plenty of other people who said, if you look at his track record, there's no way that he's not going to eventually come after certain groups of people. And he's doing that. The Cubans have felt this heat, now the Venezuelans. All of this is going on at the same time that President Trump is challenging the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. Because when you combine the two things, basically, we're just looking at a situation where it's like, I will get to determine who's an American citizen. And to be very blunt and honest, the first arbiter of that decision-making process will be the skin tone and the language that you speak. They're making that abundantly clear. How do we know? Look at the Afrikaners who have been welcomed with open arms into the United States, right? They are not escaping a genocide. Most people don't know the history of South Africa, but I can give you a very short synopsis of it. In 1913, all of that land that's in dispute right now was taken from the majority Black people in South Africa. It was a law that was passed by basically Great Britain as a colony, et cetera, et cetera. Needless to say, to this day, over 80% of the land is still owned by 8% of the population, which is, the Afrikaners, et cetera, et cetera. And so what they're trying to do is redistribute it where it goes back to families. And we're talking about the unused land, not even the used land, unused land, to make it more economically sound. And people don't like it. And so they have requested asylum here in the United States. And not only were they granted it, they were literally welcomed with the red carpet. and a Department of State representative welcoming them. Now, never mind the people who are actually escaping real genocide, real political asylum from Central America, South America, Africa, and all those other shithole countries. The one reason that they're able to do this is because they're white. And Trump said it. And then he tried to backpedal and add black and this, that, and the other, said he didn't care. But he pointed out the fact that they were white. Now, America, we have our own racial reckoning that we still have to deal with. But let's be real about this. When you're trying to kick out Afghanistan veterans, I mean, Afghan people who helped us in the global war on terrorism, you're trying to revoke their temporary protected status where they risk their lives to protect people like me and other military members over the last 20 something years. And you open and have a red carpet for these people who are coming in here. It makes you really question what America's ethics are. Where's our integrity, right? The Venezuelans, they were escaping oppression, period. The Cubans were escaping oppression, period. And the Afghans were escaping oppression because they chose to side with us in combat. But we're trying to kick them out and bring those people in. Makes zero sense to me. Zero sense to me. Let's see. I see Scott Hope. I said, I read some of the Afrikaners already complaining. Well, they'll fit right in with that MAGA cult. I mean, the reality of this situation is we as Americans have never been perfect, but we as Americans were one of the first countries to put on paper that all men are created equal, that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all these things. We have struggled to meet it, right? But we understand that it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing experiment. And what we're seeing now is one person trying to consolidate power. He's trying to ruin alliances abroad. He's trying to destroy guardrails domestically in order to consolidate power and be the one person that decides everything. And what's interesting about it is, I think we have a problem with his mental capacity too. I know Biden is in the news recently, but if you start looking at Trump first term and now, there are some differences. Let's see. Deborah Jones, do you think Musk has something to do with the white supremacists being welcome to my country? I absolutely 100% think he had everything to do with this. If you don't think Elon Musk was in President Trump's ear every day, just dropping that seed, I think you'd be very naive. As a matter of fact, when you look at his own history, his family's history, it's based on land ownership, mines, minerals, owning the rights there. And so with South Africa trying to go after land and redistribute it, of course he's going to say this. Of course he's going to advocate that, because for people who are privileged, equality seems like oppression. That's what it is. And so for the Afrikaners to come here, and now they're basically middle to lower middle class just by getting set up without having to do anything, is probably not as good as they had it back in South Africa, historically speaking. So yeah, they're probably going to complain. But the fact that they're welcome, the fact that they're under a protected status, the fact that the paperwork was minimal, the fact that the process took days, when you have people waiting years trying to do it right, it should tick off every American here, especially American citizens who did do it the right way. And it should also tick off immigrants who came here under duress, who started the proper paperwork, and now ICE is throwing it out the window. Let's see, what else do we have? Any more questions here? From Charlottesville. Go Hawkins. Hunter, thanks for the shout out. And yes, I think I know exactly who you are. And Go Wildcats. That's my high school in Atlanta that I graduated from. And speaking of schools too, I kind of had this on the back burner. I don't know if anybody's paying attention to what's happening with the Department of Education, but the eradication, the budgeting, the funding, people, this is going to affect a lot of people. Department of Education is responsible for funding people that have special needs, individual education plans, IEPs. That funding does not come from the states. It comes from allocated money that the Department of Education pushes out. FAFSA loans, where a majority of people tons of people use to go to college, that is distributed by the Department of Education. It when you factor that in with the reduction of money that public schools in general are dealing with, you're creating an educational caste system. And then the Supreme Court, what they said about affirmative action, but they did not say about legacy, creates an even wider gap. All of this is straight ripped from Project 2025. I mean, all of it. When you guys see something in the news, right? I want you can Google this, Project 2025 tracker. When you see something that doesn't make sense, go to that website. And I guarantee you'll see the little tracker move a little bit more green to what they're trying to do, because they are following it page by page. And Trump famously said he had no idea what it was, but over 30 of his people that worked in his first administration helped write it with the Heritage Foundation. You're seeing a gap in education. You're seeing a gap in class, and you're seeing a reduction in rights. Those three things are happening simultaneously. Some of it is below the waterline, right? And the reason it's below the waterline is because we're focused on what we're calling the Gulf of Mexico. We're focused on changing the name of Veterans Day and this, that, and the other, because they know that it will get you riled up. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, 14th Amendment goes away. Who's an American citizen? I ask you. Okay, what is temporary protected status mean if you are someone abroad that helps the United States and we bring you here, and then at any moment we can just rescind it and kick you out? What does it mean? What credibility do we have internationally when we do that? And economically, I want to make sure I hammer this. Most people, when they look at the stock market and all this other kind of these economic indicators, they look at it from a financial standpoint. I am not a financial person, but I will say this. As a member of the military for almost 3 decades, I understand that the reason the US dollar has been the currency standard around the world is because of the stability the United States provides. The American military has helped provide that stability, right? So people have always invested in the United States no matter what's going on in the world. For the first time in forever, like since they started the credit rating, Moody's and all this kind of stuff, we got demoted on credit, not just because of the economic decisions that are happening that Trump is pushing, the whole tariff thing and, some stuck in the 90s mentality when it comes to economics, but also the shaky alliances militarily around the world that are happening. Europe is now rearming itself, just like it did before World War I, because it can no longer rely on NATO. It can't. And then you have Putin, who's invaded a sovereign nation, and despite what Trump said, has not stopped that war. And now, as of yesterday, day before, he's punting. He's like, yep, Zelensky and Putin, they can figure it out themselves. Why? Because he got nowhere. Because the deal maker couldn't make a deal. So you destabilize that alliance in NATO. ASEAN, which are the Asian countries over in the South China Sea, they're becoming more unstable because they can't rely on an American presence. And the American presence was the singular granularity, the guarantee of economic stability worldwide, because people could rely on the United States to stand for certain things, both with its military, both with its diplomacy, both with its humanitarian activity, its soft power. All of that has been wiped out here in the first 4 going on 5 months. Will Trump followers realize he doesn't care? Thanks to Asman for that question. I would love to say they will eventually, but here's the thing. I think they will only realize that when they are personally directed, affected by a policy they know came from him. So you're seeing that with the farmers. You're seeing that, the grant money that they were given by Biden and previous administrations, to include Trump, is gone away because of Doge. They can't buy equipment. They're underwater on their farms, and they could be losing their farms, right? Now they want to stop and say, well, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't vote for Trump, because it's personally affecting them. The problem, in my humble opinion, is we as a country in America, we have gone away from understanding what it means to be collectively American to worshiping the individual and the individual only. So I'm wearing this t-shirt, right? This is what we call the double V t-shirt. And Marie, I'm about to answer that question. For those who don't know what this is, when World War II happened in the United States, the African American community had to ask themselves a question. Why the hell should we go overseas and fight a war against fascism when we're suffering through segregation, Jim Crow, lynching, and all these things here at home? And it was a deep, philosophical, psychological question that had to be asked and answered. And the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the black newspapers at the time, because segregation, came up with the Double V campaign. And their premise was, we're going to win the war abroad, and then we're going to win our rights here. Victory at home, victory abroad is what it says there. This was the symbol that many black GIs took to war in World War II, right? And it's not a coincidence when they came home, the civil rights movement kicked off, because a lot of the people that led that movement were World War II vets, right? I'm wearing this because we as a people have forgotten what it's like to fight for something other than ourselves. And people like Trump have exploited it. He knows right now the average American is not going to care about that Venezuelan mama who went with her baby and a toddler thousands of miles to the border of the United States. What would lead a woman to do that unless there was genuine fear that they would be killed if they did not go someplace? And when did the United States stop being that country that is that the Statue of Liberty's poem talks about at the base of the statue, right? We've done it before. Ellis Island, because they came from Europe, we processed millions. And we can still go look up their record. So don't tell me we don't have the capacity to do it. We've already done it. But because the shade and the language is different, all of a sudden we're limited in our ability to do it. Meanwhile, those brown people that speak that language that you may or may not understand are the first ones, along with black people, to sign up to join the military to fight for this country. Not those patriots that sit on the porch at their lake house, wrapping themselves in the flag. No, they go and do it. So don't sit there and tell me we can't. We're choosing not to because it's convenient for a guy who has never done anything but worry about himself, to include not caring about his own family, is now leading this country. And we, as Americans, have forgotten our history and our real identity. The one cool thing about being in the Navy for 26 years was when I would travel the world, and I've done a lot of stuff, and we can talk about that in future episodes, I got to see and deal with people who saw America as the promised land, and they saw Americans as helpful, people they would like to emulate. And it's the coolest thing, right? And we are just wiping that away. And it took us decades to earn that. So to answer the question, you can get the shirt. It's on Amazon now, which I was kind of surprised, in different colors. But there's a reason I have it. It's because that World War II generation, and me being Generation X, we're basically the last generation to have contact with that generation, right? Hearing the stories of fascism, hearing the stories of Jim Crow, all of those things are still in my mind from my grandparents, right? And now we're dealing with a generation that's removed from it. There is no great grandparent to tell this generation of Americans what it's like to deal with fascism abroad, what it's like to deal with discrimination. And I think that's part of the reason we're falling for it so easily. We don't recognize it because we haven't been warned. It's the same thing with the Holocaust survivors. As long as they're around, we can still refresh our memory on how terrible it is. But as they pass away, you see the rise of anti-Semitism all over the world. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. So things like this, I do to remind myself and others of what our history is, because it's going to directly impact our future. Let's see, Michelle, how do you think the military respond if they are given an illegal order, martial law, and invading an ally? Will they stand with their oath to the Constitution? Michelle, that's a very, very good point. And I think you may have been the one that shot me that question. That was going to be the one I was going to sign off on. It is my hope that the military does the right thing. There are lawful orders, and then there are unlawful orders. That's according not only to the Constitution, but to the Geneva Conventions that we sign when we get our ID. I mean, our ID has on the back of it Geneva Conventions, blah, blah, blah. People don't know that. So we're supposed to be held to this higher standard. And I mentioned this before, officers take an oath to the Constitution, but not to the president. The enlisted take an oath to the president and the officers appointed above them, but not the officers. My concern is the Judge Advocate General Corps, the JAGs, the military lawyers in Department of Defense have been gutted. The head of the Army, the head of the Navy, and the head of the Air Force JAG Corps were fired within the first couple of weeks that Trump came in. And now they're being replaced by people who I believe are more loyal to Trump's vision. The lawyer that they brought out of retirement, Tim Palatore, I know him personally. We actually served together. He is Pete Hegseth's personal lawyer. He has been recalled to active duty to help form that JAG Corps. They're trying to remove the legal constraints or try to convince military commanders when they give an unlawful order that it's lawful. I think the ultimate goal is for them to have military active duty on the ground in the United States to the point where it seems normal, a new normal. Where have we seen this before? I don't know. Try 1930s Germany. It's the same fascist playbook. There's a reason we have a National Guard. There's a reason we have local law enforcement. And there's a reason that the United States military does not turn its weapons on citizens. But they're trying to remove the legal roadblocks to do that. And right now, I'm very concerned with the lawyers not being able to say that's illegal. It's going to be up to those commanding officers to say no, unfortunately. But do I think they'll do it? Yeah. Let's see. I'm very glad you joined the Lincoln Family Clear Principle. Thank you. I don't know about clear, but I try to be principled. And don't get me wrong, it's hard speaking out. I know a lot of people feel the same way I do. Maybe they can't express it the same way, but make no mistake. Thomas Paine said it back in the 1770s in Revolution. These are the times to try men's souls. You have to be able to sacrifice and stand up when it's not popular. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, we hold that up like a sacred text. But, most of the men that signed that document, to include John Hancock's huge signature, it cost them a lot. John Hancock went broke. The biggest signature on there, right? You have people that lost family. Some of them actually died in the revolution. This whole concept was bought on sacrifice, because that's what patriotism is at the end of the day. It's not, I have a flag and I'm a cheerleader. It's sacrifice. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to give up to preserve your democracy? And that's the question that I want to leave you guys with. Please let everybody know that we're on here. We'll be back next week. We'll be a little bit earlier next week because there'll be a special broadcast in my regular time slot. But please continue to listen. Please spread the word. I will have a Substack that'll come out here later today that will follow up our discussion. Ask me questions. Let's have this be a conversation. I don't want to just be like the lecturer or the teacher yelling at everybody like, the sky's falling. No, I don't want to do that. But I do want to have a substantive discussion, one that's not cable news like, one that is not sensationalized. Just, hey, what can we do and what is happening? How do we handle it? And without further ado, I'll let you guys go. And I hope you have a good lunch or a good breakfast, wherever you're watching. And this is Bobby Jones for Anchor Watch. Talk to you later.